first Grid Star screens on June 16th, 2019, and fans praised Sam Levinson as a genius for it. He introduced complex concepts like addiction, attachment styles based on childhood trauma, exploring sexuality as a teenager in a world run by social media, and how toxic gender tropes can shape us as we grow into functional humans of society. He did all this while producing a visually and orally magnificent masterpiece in season 1. However, the longer the story went on, the less it seemed that Levinson cared about these characters or their individual journeys. Instead, he cared more about exploiting the actors and using them to explore weird fantasies that had no correlation with the story he hooked us into. What if Euphoria ran its course and gave satisfying conclusions for each character? In this rewrite, I'm reimagining the ending from the ground up. Every major character will get an ending that feels earned, honest, and true to who they are. I'll recap each character arc within the first 2 seasons, poke the holes in the storylines of season 3, and rewrite their endings to give it a more justified conclusion. Hey everyone, my name is Nathania Ray, also known as Scream Chats here on YouTube. Welcome to my humble little corner of the internet if you are new, and if you are not new, then welcome back. Since Euphoria is an ensemble, we will be going over characters individually before moving on to the next. It just feels like the most seamless way to go about a video like this. Obviously, there will be overlap because these stories interact in more ways than one, but I'll try my best to keep it organized and easy to follow for you. And I will be keeping in mind the unfortunate passing of some of the actors, just to prove to y'all that Sam Levinson, he really didn't even try, and he genuinely could have made a really, really good story, a strong story. It started off so strong, and it could have ended the same way if he genuinely tried. But RIP to Angus Cloud, who played Fez, and Eric Dane, who played Cal. Their performances in this show was phenomenal, and they are greatly missed. So we will be starting off with the secondary characters, tumbling over to the major ones, and then we'll finish off with Miss Rue Bennett herself. Up first, we've got Lexi. We're introduced to Lexi when Rue asks her to help fake a drug test in the pilot. Rue describes Lexi as her best friend, acknowledging that they had grown apart because they no longer had much in common. And by that, she meant that she had become a waste plant drug addict while Lexi was still a functioning human being. Throughout season 1, Lexi is a background character. She does nothing but serve as a way to rub up against the other characters and develop them for the audience. When it comes to her personal development, though, we don't really explore any of that until season 2. Season 2 Lexi is great because she's finally starting to come out of her own shell. She's written and directed this dramatic play showcasing her own perspective on everything she's witnessed, and we even get great insight into other characters like Rue, who genuinely seems moved by it. She's developed this relationship with Fez, so it's heartbreaking when he doesn't show up, and she later learns it's because he was getting raided by the police and carted off to prison. By the end of season 2, Lexi has finally started to show some real complexity, making her feel less like a supporting caricature and more like a real person. She feels overshadowed by her attention-seeking older sister, but she used the play to overcome that. The questions that I had for Lexi moving forward at the end of season 2 was 1, would she ever get to repair the relationship with her sister? 2, what could possibly bloom between her and Fez, if that was even something they were going to continue, considering how season 2 ended for Fez? And 3, whether she would become less of a bystander in her own story. Now let's talk about what they actually did with her in season 3 before we get to how I would have written it. So in the canon timeline, when we're reconnected with Lexi, she's working as an assistant in the film industry, which makes sense for her character considering where we left her in season 2 with the play. She's still the most judgmental character on the show, which is why I laughed so hard when she told Rue that she couldn't be friends with a Christian because they're judgmental. Like, girl, please take a look in the mirror. Please. Mind you, after that, she proceeds to spend the rest of the season judging everyone and telling them that they shouldn't be living their lives the way that they choose to live their lives. She gets Jules an opportunity on the show, which Jules fumbles, which was a very strange embarrassment and a storyline that we will talk about later on. But I do find it so ironic that Lexi was willing to give Jules a shot and Jules fumbled it. And then she's so embarrassed about bringing her sister on set. And they loved Cassie. And while they did ultimately decide not to go with Cassie because of her history, I do think that if Lexi had just advocated for her sister a little bit better instead of undermining her at every single opportunity, it could have gone a little bit different for Cassie. So, did Lexi ever really repair her relationship with her sister? Not really. In their last scene together, Lexi is regurgitating whatever it is that she read out of Rue's Bible, and Cassie is lying to her about Nate while she's cleaning a pile of dildos. This is a joke. Not even a funny joke. Like, it's one of those negging jokes that guys put on you to kind of pretend that they're flirting when they're really just testing you out to see how gullible you are and what you'll tolerate. Like, that's what it is. It's like an insult to the people who spent 7 years waiting for a conclusion to the story that these sisters would have. It's just, it makes me upset if you can't tell. And it's not just me. People were pissed about the way Levinson took this third season, how he lobotomized the characters that we had spent so much time being connected to and loving to hate. Speaking of loving to hate, though, guys, stay tuned for Nate's section because whoo, it's a doozy. But back to Lexi and the questions that we had for her. The third one was whether or not they were answered in the canon timeline of season 3. My second question was Fez. Would she ever be able to have a relationship with him after what happened at the end of season 2? What would come of that situation? Because they genuinely seemed to have a connection. And of course, we couldn't go too far into in depth with this because of Angus Cloud's passing. However, they didn't completely write him out of the show. Rue has conversations with him over the phone. She also dreams about him. We even get behind the scenes footage or live real life footage of Zendaya and Angus. So why couldn't we have just a little sprinkle of that magic with Lexi's character? We even get a scene where Rue asks Lexi, like, hey, what's going on with you and Fez? Why haven't you called him? What's going on with that? And this could have been a really good opportunity for Levinson to talk about what it could feel like for loved ones of people who get incarcerated once they're left behind, especially loved ones who are not accustomed to the same lifestyle as the incarcerated person, like Lexi. But instead of using that to say something meaningful, Lexi just shrugs it off and it's never brought up again. The last question that I had for Lexi at the end of season 2 was whether or not she would stop being a bystander in her own story. And I think the answer to that is no. But I think that's okay because in her core, someone like that would need this big catastrophic kind of moment in order to have such a drastic change. And we are looking for organic character development, which I do think she kind of has had, opposed to complete lobotomies like what we experience with Nate and Jules. Oh gosh. We'll talk about them soon, don't worry. First, though, let's talk about how I would have rewritten Lexi's story. And there are 3 things that I like to change. First, I want to say I don't like the way that they did Cassie and Lexi's relationship this season. By that, I primarily mean Cassie's side of things. Lexi being embarrassed by her sister's porn exploits and pissed off at Maddy for essentially pimping her out makes sense. However, though, Cassie being so muted by Lexi's constant judgment and dismissiveness, that feels out of character for Cassie. She never had an issue standing up to her sister in the past, even when she was dead wrong. In season 3, Cassie has no genuine personality or motivations other than being rich and famous, which was never really anything that she seemed to care about previously. In the first 2 seasons, all she ever wanted was to be loved. Every decision that Cassie made was based on her desire to be loved, primarily by a man. But more on that in Cassie's section, though. I just wanted to say that I would have liked to see more push and pull between the sisters rather than it just being Lexi constantly smashing Cassie down like a whack-a-mole. I also think a great way to have had more pushback between the sisters would have been if they had actually went along with the storyline of Lexi writing a part for Cassie in the show. I was genuinely excited for that. And when Lexi was talking to the other girl about it and she suggested that Lexi kill Cassie off, I was all for that argument where Cassie's like, why did you do that? How could you kill me off right as soon as I get on the show? Like some type of conflict between the two sisters other than Lexi just being judgmental about Cassie doing porn. Cassie had such a negative experience with Lexi's play, and I think this could have been another way to either have a full circle moment and have another negative experience, which really drives the sisters apart, or they're able to kind of reconcile and come back together due to the bonding experience of the show. But alas, forget about the characters we've spent 7 years loving on. They don't deserve that screen time, according to Levinson. Alamo does. The second change I would make regarding Lexi's story would be the scene where Rue asks her about Fez. Like I said before, I feel like this was a real missed opportunity on Levinson's part, and there could have been a real conversation around Fez and Lexi's relationship after he went to prison. Maybe Lexi was feeling angry at Fez for getting arrested in the first place and leaving her behind. Or maybe she wouldn't be angry at all. Maybe she'd be sad and too emotionally overwhelmed by the thought of him being in prison, and it's just too much for her, so she can't talk about it or can't talk to him. Personally, though, the route I would have gone with Lexi's character regarding her relationship with Fez is indifference. I feel like Lexi is the type of person who just takes life for what it is. So, yeah, Fez is incarcerated, he's in jail. Lexi is not in jail. She's out in the world and she's building her career, and that's what she's going to focus on. She can't focus on the guy who was selling drugs and got himself locked up. What's that got to do with her? She has to move on with her life. And I would also have her throw in a line about not being able to be bogged down and associated with a known criminal. I feel like Lexi is the type of person that would say something just like that. The last change I'd make regarding Lexi's character is I would not have her word vomiting the Bible quotes at Cassie in their final scene together. That just felt so random, forced, out of place. It didn't feel like it fit there at all. Especially when you think about how Lexi reacted to Rue reading the Bible in the first place. Even in their last scene together, Lexi was dismissive of Rue reading the Bible. Now all of a sudden she is reading it obsessively and quoting it at Cassie when she's never believed in this. Now I understand that Sam Levinson wanted to get his point across about religion, and I'm all for speaking your theme through your characters. However, giving those lines to characters who would never say them otherwise, it just feels like such a lazy writing decision, and I just don't understand it. It's the same thing with Maddy yammering on about Jesus and jubilation in the diner. When has Maddy ever talked like that? These characters have never expressed any interest in religion whatsoever. So plopping in these lines of dialogue, it just takes me out of the scene completely. Now, there have been a little bouts of religious talk throughout the show, and that's why adding on to this change, I would adjust this conversation so that it's not Lexi having it with her sister, but rather this is the only time Lexi interacts with Fez throughout the season, where she calls him to let him know that Rue has passed away. Similar to in the canon timeline, how we had that phone call with Alamo and Rue's mom, she let him know that Rue has passed away. You don't obviously get his side of the phone call, but you get Lexi's side, and you hear her responding, and you hear her talking to him, and you hear her talking about her perspective on religion and how Rue's death has impacted her perception perspective on it, and that is where I would have those lines of dialogue. I feel like that is a lot more organic than what we got. I do like the final scene that the sisters get together, though. I like the general gist of the conversation, obviously, minus the religious banter. They talk about their father and compare their grief for Rue to the abandonment they felt when he left. And I think this makes sense for Cassie to avoid sharing too much about Nate because in her core, the sisters are never really that trusting of one another. Even if they did repair their relationship on the show, I can't see them being close enough where Cassie shares that. And I will change the way that Nate passes. So we will get to that, but what does happen in the timeline between Nate and Cassie and him passing? Lexi, I will keep her never knowing about it. I would keep Cassie never sharing that with his family. I just think there's something so dark and twisted about her having to hold that, and she can't ever talk about it with anyone other than maybe Maddy. We'll discuss the mansion and the dildos and all that good stuff in Cassie's section, but in the meantime, let's move on to my favorite forgotten character. Kat was one of my favorite characters in season 1. She's also the one I found myself relating to most for many reasons. Navigating weight gain and its relation to one's evolving sexuality was a storyline that I connected to. Being pressured externally to engage in sexual activity, being exposed for said sexual activity, turning that around into something meant to be empowering, but ultimately feeling even more unsafe, that was a compelling arc. And I was so excited to see where they took her character in season 2 and beyond. Unfortunately, though, season 2 Kat was a big, empty void. Her big fight with Maddy at the end of season 1 was resolved off camera, which I felt personally robbed. Her breakup with Ethan gave me secondhand embarrassment. And I'm not saying that having her breakup with him was the wrong choice. I'm not even saying how she broke up with him, the whole lie about having cancer. Even that I think was fine, considering she's at the end of the day a dumb ass shallow teenager. Now I'm not, let me not even say she's a dumbass, she's just a teenager. And this breakup scene that brought us down and reminded us of that, between all of the sexy twerking montages of her with a kitty costume telling men to stroke it like they mean it. But Kat's character went from being one of the main characters in the ensemble to barely being visible in season 2 to completely written out in season 3. But some of the questions that I had about Kat were whether she'd reconcile with Ethan, whether she'd fully quit porn, whether she'd pursue writing as a career, and what a healthy romantic relationship could look like for her. Let's explore how we could have incorporated her into season 3, giving her a compelling arc and a satisfying conclusion. It's established early in Kat's story that she loves writing. She got Tumblr famous, writing One Direction fanfiction in high school, so it makes sense to further develop this in the time jump. Similar to Lexi working in the Hollywood gutter to make it in film, I have Kat working at a publishing agency. If you've seen Pretty Little Liars, think of like Aria in season 7. Of course, without the whole Ezria book writing situation. We always got these fantastical moments with Kat, especially in season 1. So I'd keep that trend up here. I'd have her fantasize about giving her boss her manuscript, his falling in love with it, and her becoming rich from all the fans and royalties. In reality, though, her boss will dismiss her work as bad writing and insist that the only way he'd push her work out is if the Kitty Queen agreed to sleep with him. For those of y'all who forgot, the Kitty Queen is Kat's alter ego from when she was doing porn. So her boss would confess to having had known about her online persona all along and admit to having even paid for her content in the past.
I'm editing, but I just wanted to say I feel like this is a really responsible way to take this storyline when you consider that a lot of the people watching it are teenagers and they're seeing this, not realizing that the things you post online can be found by the people in real life. And people can track you down based off of your online persona. Like, her name is the Kitty Queen and her real name is Cat, like Honey Bunny. You think you're being so anonymous, but you're not.
He'd basically do the typical pervy boss move and try to pressure her into sleeping with him. And she'd consider it, of course, obviously, she would, because she'd slept with guys for less before. And this man has the potential to give her everything she's ever wanted. But overall, he's old, he's gross, his mannerisms, everything about him, she's just grossed out and she decides I cannot do this and she'll quit her job. Now, this would put Kat in a depressive slump where she would go into a very aggressive eating binge. We've seen this with Kat's character before. When she's feeling very depressed, she just starts overeating and trying to use food as a way to fill the emptiness inside her. In my timeline, I would have Kat and Jules be roommates at this point, and we'll talk more about Jules' storyline in a minute. And I completely changed her, y'all, because I don't like what they did with her at all. But I would have Jules really help Kat to kind of get out of her own head. I'd have her take Kat out. She'd meet up with Maddy and Lexi and they'd all get drinks. I think one of the biggest downfalls in season 3 is that the characters don't interact with one another as much as they had in the previous seasons. It's always been an ensemble where each character had their own individual stories, but they were all entangled like one big bowl of linguine. In season 3, it's like everyone is doing their own thing with the exception of some minor tangles, like Maddy and Cassie's story gets tangled. Lexi is always around everyone, but there's not really so many intertwining storylines. But outside of the intertwining storylines, they're not really just friends doing friend stuff. So, like I said, I'd have them all go out for drinks. Maddy, Lexi, Kat, and Jules. They'd all meet up, they'd have drinks. Lexi would mention very casually to Kat that Ethan had gotten a job on set. Ethan was very excited to be a part of Lexi's play in season 2. So I think it could be interesting to have him pursue a career in acting because one, it keeps him in the show because I actually liked Ethan's character a lot. So he'd still be able to be in the show outside of his relationship with Kat. And it also is a way to create some kind of tension within Kat's storyline because now some time has passed by. He's a lot, bigger. He's coming to his grown man body. He's looking good. He's making money. He's doing his own thing. And Kat is kind of second guessing breaking up with him in high school. And on top of that, she's disgusted with herself. So it's not even like she feels confident enough to go and make a move on him. She wouldn't even want him to see her because she's been binge eating for who knows how long at this point. So the girls would be trying to help Kat out of this slump. Maddy would recommend her personal trainer, but Kat would just, tell her, I'm unemployed now, girly pop. I cannot afford a personal trainer. Jules would suggest that Kat get out there and start dating again because that could help boost her confidence, but Kat is completely against that. She's like, no, like I do not feel confident enough to even go on a date. That's not where I am. And Lexi would suggest that Kat start writing fan fiction again. And this is a suggestion that she does take. The newfound spark of confidence from her success in writing would push Kat to start taking better care of herself. I'd have her organically meet a man out in the world. It could be at a grocery store, it could be at the library, it could even be at the gym. The point is that we would be able to see Kat in a healthy relationship with a man she actually finds herself attracted to. I would also have Kat serve as a kind of like middle ground between Cassie and Maddy. Whereas Cassie reaches out to Maddy, I think in episode either one or two, and she's talking to Rue about it. I think it would be interesting if Kat were in that scene and where Rue was just like, "Oh yeah, round two, baby," like she's kind of laughing it off. I feel like Kat will kind of be like, "Are you sure you really want to even be talking to this girl again? She's a weirdo. She actually got with your man when she was your best friend. She's not someone that you can trust." And I think Kat would play that role for the season. Whilst all the friend group went to the wedding, I would have Kat be the one who decides she doesn't want to go because she doesn't believe in that marriage and she feels like it's weird. I think it's episode 4 where Jules goes on set to do the painting for Lexi's team. And I would have Kat join her for that. I'd have her just kind of roaming around set, mingling or whatever. And it's really an excuse because she wants to see Ethan. And at that point, I'd have her run into him on set. He would see her. He would, of course, think she looks amazing because she does. And I'd have him ask her out for coffee. Of course, he's still going to be very mindful of the way that their relationship ended, but he's still going to fall for it. He still has those unresolved feelings for her. And he's interested to see if she's grown as a person, if they could possibly rekindle things, and there will be a love triangle for Kat between the new interest that she finds and Ethan. I like the idea of Kat going from the girl who was dumped because of her weight gain to struggling so much with her sexuality and being hypersexual because of her body, and then becoming this woman who is so confident within herself and her appearance and her body that she's not willing to settle for a love that she is not satisfied with, and she has two options to choose from, and she's going to decide what makes the most sense for her. Ultimately, I would have her decide to go with the other guy rather than with Ethan. Whilst Ethan is a great character and I do enjoy him on screen, I don't feel like he was the person for Cats at the end. I think he was just like a high school kind of, love interest type of thing. I also think it's so funny to explore the different extremities to where the characters are at this point in the story. We've got Kat basically living in a rom-com. We've got Rue, a snitch for the DEA, and we've got Nate essentially being ripped apart by gangsters. It's very wild, and they're all living drastically different lives. But speaking of Nate, let's get into him. He's one I've been eager to talk about. We are first introduced to Nathaniel Jacobs when he buys drugs from Vesco at a party that he's convinced McKay to host. The two boys are riding together in Nate's car when he catcalls Jules, damn near running the girl off the road on her bike. And their next interaction is at McKay's party, where he goes on a full rampage after spotting Maddy hooking up in the pool with a random. Right off the bat, Nate is shown to be an immature, narcissistic, manic, closeted homophobic gay man baby. Let me be very clear. Nathaniel Jacobs hates women. He only likes what they provide for him in terms of boosting his own masculinity. And Rue says in her voiceover how Nate doesn't like his mother because he feels like she's a pushover. But personally, I feel like that's some internalized self-hatred and projection about his father's affairs. It's hard to imagine after all of those years she never knew. Plus, we never learned the lore on that third brother in the family photos. And I guess we never will. Maybe part of his hatred for his mother was connected to that. We'll never know. Wrapping things up with Nate in season 2, we had tons of questions to explore and material to go over with him in season 3. For instance, I wanted to know if he'd ever admit that he's attracted to men. I wanted to know what would come of the relationship between he and his father and how his family responded to him turning Cal in. I wanted to know if he would ever make amends with Jules or Maddy or Tyler. I doubt he would have ever made amends with Tyler, but Would that come back around in a full circle moment? I would have loved to see that. How did McKay respond to learning about Nate and Cassie's relationship? And the most fascinating mystery to me regarding the Jacobs family is what the hell was the situation with that third boy? What happened to him? There were so many things to discuss with Nate's character in season 3, but instead Levinson just wanted to lobotomize his character and chop up his body parts. First of all, Nate is barely even in the show beyond the first 3 episodes. And I can't even say that one of the show's most dynamic personalities has become a shadow of his former self, because that's not even true. This is not even the same character. The Nate Jacobs that we grew to hate within the first 2 seasons disappeared. He fell off the fate of the cinematic universe when he walked out that auditorium at the end of season 2. He was replaced by a lazy yes man who did nothing to drive his own story forward except essentially allow his wife to be pimped out and spew excuse after excuse on why he was so useless. Mind you, this is the same character who threatened to murder people in season 1 just for Maddy knowing that they had a bigger schlong than him. How did he go from that to this? It's maddening. At the wedding, Cassie puts on a whole scene emasculating Nate, and he does nothing but plead and beg her to stop. Even when she pops him in the eye with the corkscrew and you think he's gonna explode and lose it and spaz out, he just goes by himself to Seoul. Now, this could be seen as character growth. Maybe he learned his lesson from choking Maddy out at the carnival, and he knows now that he can't be, making scenes in public, beating up women. But honestly, I think it's just because Levinson preferred Nate to be a passive punching bag this season for retribution in terms of all his crimes. There's genuinely not much to even say about season 3 Nate. He's taken over his father's real estate company, which he's pummeled into debt with his plan for a retirement community on land he can't build on. So when he can't pay back the investors he'd swindled into funding said retirement community, they crash his wedding, giving his bride a bloody nose and cut off his toe. Now, I know what you're thinking. Season 1 Nate would have found a way to turn this whole thing around. He would have found a way to make that Armenian asswipe pay for embarrassing him like that. Humiliating Nathaniel Jacobs in front of his friends, his neighbors, and his bride. He would have lived, eaten, and breathed vengeance for that. For less than that. But no, he doesn't even try to run away. He just stays at the same mansion he was attacked in without any protection. He allows and even encourages Cassie to pimp herself out for money while groveling and begging her for forgiveness. Then he doesn't even attempt to make any money on his own to help speed up the repayment process. He just waits for Cassie to send him money, hoping it's frequent enough to avoid other body parts from being chopped off, which it isn't. So eventually, the poster boy for toxic masculinity gets shoved into a coffin and buried alive at the site where his retirement community was supposed to be built. When his brother comes to look for him, since he's been missing for who knows how long, he screams too late, which his brother doesn't hear, but it does attract a rattlesnake that ends up biting him and killing him. This was so anticlimactic. I was genuinely bored. I was like, so wait, that's it? That's how he goes out? And then when they reveal it, when Cassie and Maddy finds him, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, that's the end. That's how they ended Nick Jacobs? Alright. Alright. Okay. 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 Oh, okay. Alright. Alright. Okay. Alright. Okay. Okay. Nate's death is also the catalyst for Maddy, the girl he loved so much that he stalked and beat the shit out of Tyler over in season 1, becoming a sex slave to Alamo for trying to save Nate's life in the first place. I don't know what Levinson was doing in the writer's room when he decided that that's how he was going to end Nathaniel Jacobs' life, but I hope he never does it again. I do want to clarify that I am not against Nate becoming this docile, complacent, broken down individual. However, we needed more on screen development to show how Nate got there. I would have loved a special episode with Nate, kind of like what we got with Jules at the end of season 1, where he either maybe he could have hired a prostitute, where he just got the opportunity to complain and rant and rave for an hour, admitting things that he would never have admitted to anyone else ever. Or it doesn't even have to be a prostitute. It could literally be one of his employees at the construction site. Maybe one of them doesn't speak English and he just goes on a full rant talking to the guy, and the guy's like, si, senor, si. Like, I could have seen Levinson doing something like that even. I think it would have been even funnier if Nate had just assumed that the man didn't speak English, and then at the very end, when he's like, okay, you can get back to work now, the guy looks at Nate and is like, yes, sir, I got it. Or like just speaks back to him in English with a fine American accent, and Nate is like, I think that could have been really funny. But imagine if we did get the special episode with Nate and it paralleled the intro that we got with Cal in season 2, and it's like him going into maybe a gay bar and he meets someone. She's my dog. But y'all see what I'm saying though. It's understandable for someone who felt like they were on the top of the world in high school to grow up and face the real world and realize, yeah, shit ain't really that sweet. It's a hard shift to adulthood for most people. That's considered normal. But Nate, he took over his father's company, he proposed to the girl that society deemed to be the prettiest, and he bought the biggest house that he could manage. But still, it wasn't enough to make him feel alive. Never enough to make him feel as alive as he felt during those 3 weeks he spent texting Jules in the 12th grade. During one of the scenes where Cassie was complaining about the wedding flowers, I would have Nate being distracted on his phone scrolling through Instagram when he comes across a recent post of Jules. I'd have him click on her profile, scroll back looking at her photos from high school, and just kind of admiring her. Nate would be completely tuned out to what Cassie is saying, and we would get that through the score. But when Cassie mentions that she is willing to sell her body to get those flowers if Nate is not able to pay for it, that is what will get his attention. He will accidentally like one of Jules's old photos from high school. Obviously, in a situation like that, he would panic, unlike the photo, put down his phone nervously, and redirect his attention back to Cassie, who at this point is very frustrated and flustered because she is very much aware that Nate is not paying attention to her. And not only is he not paying attention to her, he's refusing to get her the flowers that she wants for their wedding. Now, I like this little addition because we left things in season 2 with Nate still having these unresolved feelings for Jules. And while he was still very homophobic up until his last days, Nate deep down wants to be with men. And Jules could have been something of a middle ground for him, considering how feminine she was, but she has a penis. And I would make this internal conflict be the catalyst for his mental health decline and why he's sleepwalking through life at this point. Nate's storyline has always been very parallel to Cal's, so I feel like this makes a lot of sense in terms of the direction to go with his character. So when the real estate plot fails and the Armenians take his toe, it makes sense for him to wallow in self-pity for an episode because he is genuinely fucked in the head. At the wedding, when Cassie and the corkscrew explode, I would have had Cal go talk with Nate instead of his brother Aaron. I'd give Nate a mini version of the Cal breakdown we got at the end of season 2. He wouldn't confess to the money problems or even to liking men, but he would vent about his transition to adulthood and about realizing how much harder the real world is than high school. And it would be a tough love moment between the father and son. He'd tell Nate that he was proud of him for doing what he'd been able to do for himself. He'd grab Nate's shoulder in a paternal kind of way and mention how proud his little brother would have been too. The two men would share a moment of eye contact, broken first by Nate and his shame. And this would actually prompt Nate to walk out of the room mid convo, essentially leaving his father behind. And this would be the last interaction that the two men ever share. He'd find himself breaking down privately and severely damaging his hand by punching a wall. And this gives plausibility to Nate's big ass getting beat the hell up by the Armenian bodyguard without even landing a single punch. Like, Nate didn't even try to fight back in the canon timeline, and this at least gives a reason as to why he couldn't. But breakdown or not, Nate Jacobs is a narcissist. He would never truly go down like this without a fight. So in episode 4, I would have him put on his big boy stalker boots and start trailing the board members who denied his building permits. He'd be looking for blackmail or anything at all that could get him what he needed. And this would be when I'd have Nate discover that the person denying Nate's permit was actually Tyler's father. So during his meeting, when Bill insists on denying his appeal, he tried to make a swipe at Bill's credibility. When Nate asked if he was trying to ruin his life on a personal vendetta, he would mention his son being put in jail for attacking his ex-girlfriend in high school. This would be a shock to the other board members, and Nate would insist on a conflict of interest, but ultimately he would still lose his appeal. And this just feels so much more authentic to the character than having him plead on his hands and knees to a bunch of strangers. Nate Jacobs would never do that. The Nate Daniel Jacobs that we knew from season 1 and 2, he would never, ever in a million years get down on his hands and knees and beg a room full of strangers to give him anything. He would take it by any means necessary. And if he couldn't take it, then he would make damn sure somebody suffered for it. And in my timeline, Nate would be entirely too prideful to be okay with Cassie on OnlyFans. And when the video of her in some guy's bed doing coke went public, he would go ballistic. Just as he was headed to deal with Cassie and assure her that he had a plan to get everything under control, which of course would be a lie, he'd be knocked unconscious and subdued by the Armenian bodyguard. Now, since Levinson was just set on the nature torture porn this season, I would give that to him from here. Instead of having Nate just hanging out in the house waiting for Cassie to send him money, I would have it so that the Armenians had him kidnapped the whole time from the end of episode 4. So he'd be handcuffed or zip tied to a chair, unable to go anywhere for at least an episode or 2. But I also think that Nate is the type of person that would break his own hand to get free. Like I feel like Nate would just do any and everything he can to take control back over any situation, no matter what it is. Even if someone else would give up hope and feel like it's just lost, Nate, he would be like, I've got to get out of here and I've got to outsmart these dumbass people however he can. So he'd figure out a way to get out and escape. And just as we think he's about to make it, he gets knocked out again by the bodyguard. And we wouldn't see him again until the second to last episode. I do like the idea of killing Nate off, but I don't like the whole rattlesnake in the coffin thing. It made no sense for his character. There was no full circle moment. There was no bigger lesson in anything. Like, what was the rattlesnake meant to represent? I know he had this thing with the snakes and the whole Western theme or whatever, but in relation to Nate's character, what was the point of the rattlesnake going into the coffin and biting him? Why was that his death? What was the symbolism behind that? Instead, I would tie his demise to everything this character represented in the first 2 seasons: toxic masculinity, homophobia, misogyny, and perfectionism, all wrapped in a tight little bow. We'll get into exactly how I would have killed Nate off in Cassie's section, though. But in the moments leading up to his death, I'd have Nate's life kind of flashing before his eyes. He'd see all the things he'd done that led him up to this moment: finding his father's tapes, meeting Maddy, abusing Maddy, stalking Tyler, his affair with Cassie, his failings with the real estate business, and finally we see the face of his younger brother. So in his final moments, I would reveal that Nate tried to replicate what he saw on the videos with Cal on his little brother. So at this point, he's young, he's confused, he's going through puberty, he's trying to figure out his own sexuality, and this is how he decided to experiment and figure that out. And He's not thinking about the consequences of his actions. He's not thinking about how he's hurting his brothers. So when the boy is broken and crying and curled up in a ball, terrified of the brother that was always meant to be his protector, Nate would feel shame in what he did. And he would try to convince his younger brother not to say anything, but devastated from what had happened to him, his brother would insist, like, no, I'm going to tell on you. You should not have done that to me. Terrified that this would come out, Nate would say, you're right, I'm sorry. He would pretend to be caring for his brother, putting him in bed, tucking him in, kissing his forehead, telling him, you know, like, it's all going to be okay. And then Nate, 11-year-old Nate Jacobs, would smother his younger brother with a pillow. And we'll say that Cal learned what Nate did pretty much right away when they took the body to the morgue and he spoke with the medical examiner. Like, the medical examiner is going to know, yeah, this boy was abused and then smothered. Like, he's going to figure that out. But we will say that Cal used his influence to protect Nate and keep it a secret from Marcia and the rest of the family. This adds so much weight to a story that's already way too heavy. But I think it brings a lot of context to the raging fire between the two men from the very start of the show. The writing around Jules in season 1 and even parts of season 2 was outstanding. Her story felt like it was made with genuine love, care, and commentary on femininity and how a person can go about reaching its peak. We were asking real questions like, what is femininity? Does a person need to conquer men in order to be feminine? What does that even mean, conquering men? Is it being admired by them, lusted after them, loved by them? What does it mean for someone's femininity if they're not attracted to men, or if men aren't attracted to them? These are great questions to ask. So let's talk a little bit about the special episode because that's really where we get a lot of insight into Jules's character. In her therapy session, Jules describes herself as philosophically uninterested in men, declaring them boring and having no authority over her relationship to womanhood. This is what prompted Jules to stop dressing so performatively in season 2, as she no longer felt the need to fall under the male gaze. She talked about wanting to feel deep like the ocean as she planned on removing the implant in her arm that had been blocking her from puberty. In the therapy session, Jules also talked about Rue and the things that she likes about her. And let's be honest, Rue was definitely right. She clocked it when she told Jules, you only like me because of how I make you feel and the things I do for you and how much I love you. Yeah, Jules didn't really love Rue for anything other than that. And that's made very clear in the special episode. She also feels this sense of responsibility in terms of Rue because she feels like if she isn't always there for Rue, then her sobriety would be in danger. And that's a big responsibility for a teenager to have, especially a teenager with the history that her mom has. In hindsight, it makes sense that their relationship didn't work because Jules absolutely was always going to outgrow Rue. I can understand characters like Lexi, Cassie, Maddy, and even Kat. I can understand them sticking by Rue through all her crap in season 3. At the end of season 2, though, Jules and Rue weren't even talking anymore. So the questions that I have for Jules moving forward into season 3 are what her relationship would look like with men moving forward. She had that weird slip up with Elliot, which in a perfect world, I would have completely written him out of season 2 and spent that time developing Kat's character or devoting that time to her arc. I do like the way he was able to rub in between Rue and Jules's relationship and kind of call out some of the flaws there. But I think that there are other ways that we could have done that. We're not talking about season 2 though. We're talking about what we would have liked for Jules in season 3. So 1, we want to know what her relationship with men would look like moving forward. 2, I wanted to know if she would ever be able to forgive her mother and repair that relationship because it seemed like it was something that really weighed on Jules in that special episode when she talked about it. Also, Nate. Jules was rightfully terrified of Nate, but she also had such strong feelings for him before he was revealed to be Nate. So I would have liked to see maybe one or two more interactions between Nate and Jules in season 3, just to see what could have really sparked from that. I don't think Jules would have forgiven Nate or really even given him the time of day, but I do think that it could have really poked the bear with Nate's character a lot more, to see Jules just blatantly disregarding him so much. And it's funny because I wasn't even asking myself if Rue and Jules would repair their relationship in season 3, because I didn't see them doing that at all. I didn't think they would even talk in season 3. And if they did, it would be more of an approach on how Jules views Nate. Now, that might seem extreme considering how close Jules and Rue were in the first 2 seasons, but that crash out that Rue had, if I was Jules, I never would have spoke to that girl again. And maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm too harsh and too strict. But with the history that Jules's mom has of abusing drugs and locking her up in a psych ward and just being a horrible mom altogether, to then end up in a romantic relationship with someone who is equally abusive or even more so, yeah, like you just couldn't pay me to be around her again. So let's talk about what Levinson ended up doing with Jules in season 3 and if he answered any of the questions. Jules in season 3 got the season 2 cat treatment. She was a complete nothing burger of a character. Levinson literally gave that girl nothing to do after the wedding. Actually, it's about time we fully discussed the wedding, which was the best episode of the season. So, this episode starts off with Jules painting. Go figure. We quickly dive into her montage of serial dating older men until she lands on a married plastic surgeon who gives her a huge apartment in exchange for letting him enact his weird, claustrophobic fetishes on her. She stopped caring whether or not she'd become a successful artist. I guess that's because she felt financially taken care of by this guy. There seems to be no regard for the future, though. Did she expect him to pay for her lifestyle for the rest of her life? I guess. It's supposed to be empowering for Jules, but I don't know. It doesn't translate like that for me. Anyway, Jules shows up to the wedding in a 30-inch bust down with 3 pieces of string stitched together and called it a dress. And she's Rue's date. Don't get me wrong, I love Jules's new look. Hunter Schafer, she did that. However, there was no explanation how we got from short bob Jules at the end of season 2 wearing no makeup and deciding to step away from dressing for the male gaze. How do we get from that to this? Again, similar to Nate, we needed some off-screen development or just understanding, a throwaway line, something to explain what's going on. This used to be such a character driven show, and it's now like these characters are just chess pieces that are being moved across the board so Levinson can get whatever religious point across he's trying to make and exploit the actors' bodies. I do find that scene hilarious though, when Martha spots Cal eyeing Jules and she asks him who it is, and he's like, "Oh, it's one of Nate's friends from high school." And she's like, "Oh, okay, like you're still an ancient lying ass mother." But I have to admit, I do appreciate the acknowledgement of the past. I like that they even get to have a conversation where Jules is she keeps it cute, she's very calm, but she's also very frank with him. And it's like, you recorded me, and you like them very young, and you deserve to be on the sex offender registry, BTW. Like, she told him what it was very calmly, but still. And I felt satisfied with this being their last interaction. It feels like a completed storyline. The situation with Nate, though, I have to admit, I was a little annoyed upon my first watching when Nate asked about Maddy and Jules said she got emotional. It felt like a little too much for her. Like, girl, you couldn't lie for your friends to save her a little bit of dignity. But I think in the moment, getting a dig at Nate felt more important to her than protecting Maddy's dignity. She was probably hoping that he would feel bad for upsetting Maddy, but he simply just shrugged it off and was like, we love who we love. But while he said that, though, he's maintaining eye contact with Jules the whole time, and it's giving heavy sexual tension. But of course, in canon, this doesn't go anywhere, and the two never see each other again. One of the strangest storylines with Jules this season is when Lexi asks her to paint something for her show, and Jules paints a picnic with a bunch of trans women running around naked. Babes, babes, it's a network show. You literally can't do that, babes. And Jules gets offended when the network is not into the painting and they're like, can you cover up the penises? And she's like, oh, how many peni do you want me to remove? Like, girl, all of them. And she's even more upset. She's like, oh, but the breasts are okay? Like, no, girl, remove all of the nudity. Put some clothes on them. This is not, why are they naked in the first place? And then Lexi, she's like, she's trans. Like, girl, this is too much. But Jules just frames this as problematic. Like, they don't understand my art. They don't get it. This is me, and she ruins the painting and leaves. Okay. I don't know. If I was Lexi, I would have never spoken to Jules again because what are you doing here, sister? And Lexi got reprimanded by her boss too. What she said it was like $50,000 or something that painting messing up is cost the network essentially. Yeah, Jules, you would have had to catch me outside because what are you doing? And I can admit that as a cisgendered woman, maybe the whole point of that storyline just went completely over my head. If you guys understand where Levinson was going with that, please let me know in the comments down below because it went completely over my head. I just don't get it. I don't understand why Jules felt like that painting was appropriate, even if it were just naked cisgendered men or naked cisgendered women. Why are there genitals? Why are there naked people? And that's all Jules paints. This whole season is just every painting that she makes has a penis. What happened to decensoring men? Why does everything have penises in it, Jules? What's going on, Levinson? The whole plot line just felt so clumsy and awkward. The two girls never get a confrontation about it. I don't even think they speak again for the rest of the show. Jules is just confined to her apartment painting until Rue or her sugar daddy comes to visit her. She doesn't even go outside for coffee. But during these visits from Rue, the two women discuss a plethora of topics. For one, Jules questions Rue on whether or not she's been able to have any serious relationships over the years, saying that she finds it hard to believe that Rue is capable of expressing emotions and being in a real relationship with another person. In response to this, Rue brings up Angel, who up until this point she still believes is in rehab. The two end up sleeping together off screen at one point, and her sugar daddy finds out about it, throws the girl's boxer in Jules's face and is like, don't you dare sleep with anyone else again. So when the next time Rue comes over, she's talking to Jules about wanting to start a family so she has something bigger than herself to live for. This is triggering for Jules, and she doesn't like the family talk at all. It's just a reminder of what she doesn't have. Rue calls her out for being a wind-up toy trapped in a cage disguised as a pretty apartment. And this sets Jules off. She bitch slaps the shit out of Rue and kicks her out of the apartment. And that is the last interaction that Rue and Jules ever have. Actually, I think this might be the last time that we see Jules, period, except for the one 30-second little scene we get of her making a sad painting of Rue after finding out about Rue's passing. And the shot is literally ruined with her sugar daddy coming up behind her with a kiss. Like, we don't care about that man. We wanted a real reaction from Jules, who was the main love interest for the first 2 seasons. This is the only art that she's done this entire season, BTW, that does not feature a penis. What a slap in the face to the girl who cared so deeply for Rue and made the conscious decision to decenter men. Rather than sticking to that idea, though, her entire life ends up revolving around men under the guise that they take care of her. We didn't hear a single line of dialogue about her mother, which I guess implies that they never repaired their relationship and are probably no contact. So, no closure on that topic either. Jules took a leap of faith by attending the wedding with Rue, who ditched her halfway through, resulting in her having uncomfortable conversations with both Nate and his father, men she despises. I think there should have been some consequences for this. There should have been at least one episode where Jules and Rue fought about this. One thing I would change about Jules's conversation with Nate at the wedding is when he looked at her and said, "You love who you love." I would have them address the elephant in the room. This could have been an interesting opportunity to circle back to the photo that Nate liked on Instagram when he was fighting with Cassie, or not fighting with Cassie. This could have been a conversation where they talked about those 3 weeks in high school, and Nate is vulnerable enough to confess how much he truly cared for her. She'd brush him off, but he'd talk about how he'd been sleepwalking through life for years, haunted by the way he hurt her. He'd be hunching his wife, and Jules's face is the one he'd imagine. She was the only person he'd ever been able to genuinely just be himself with. And Jules would respond, "But you weren't yourself, even then, Nate," and walk away. And he'd be left standing there, and the camera would stay on him, watching her as she left. And I like this a lot because it touches on how much Nate genuinely cared for Jules and regretted his actions, but her perspective on the situation is just too drastically different. He lied to her about everything from his name to his living conditions. He told her he was raised by a single mom. Like, everything that had to do with who he was a lie. So yeah, him getting to know her in her authentic self and falling in love for her, that's his side of things. But she was being lied to the whole time. So why would she still have feelings for him? And her walking away from him is genuinely gonna break his heart, but what can he do? He's married to Cassie now. I would completely cut the sugar baby storyline with Jules. I just don't feel like it was the right direction to go for her character. I mentioned earlier that I would have her living with Kat. And instead of having her make the conscious decision to drop out of school because her sugar daddy was paying for everything, I would instead have her fail out. I think season 3 was a great opportunity to shed light on how hard transitioning from high school into adulthood really can be. And I think Jules is a great character to really explore that with. So during these house visits with Rue, Jules, and Kat, the 3 women would have these philosophical conversations, and that would be a great place for Levinson to plop in all of his ramblings about Christianity and religion. And it's during these conversations that we'll learn Jules has been in no contact with her mom since high school. And we'll say that her mom decided not to attend graduation, and that was the final straw for Jules, where she was just like, "Yeah, I'm never talking to you ever again." I like the idea of Rue looking for a larger purpose in life, thinking maybe if she had a family, she would be a better person. And I keep the scene where Rue and Jules are talking, and Jules is egging Rue on to make a move. Maybe she's implying that the 2 women could be happy together and start a life and have a family. And I think this would be Jules kind of cracking a little bit because she knows deep down that her and Rue are toxic for one another. They do not make sense as a couple anymore. Even in all her drama, where she's a college dropout and she has nothing really going for herself, she's still outgrown Rue. But regardless of all that, Jules is kind of self sabotaging and trying to see if there could be something between her and Rue, knowing that it'll ultimately lead to disappointment. So instead of their last interaction being about Jules trapped in a cage with the sugar daddy, I would instead have Jules calling Rue out for being so all over the place, so inconsistent, and saying one minute that she wants to have a family and she wants to have a wife and she wants to have a life, and then the next minute she disappears and she's off fucking off with Alamo, but Jules doesn't know this. She just thinks Rue is off on a bender. I would have the two women really hashing it out, and this would actually replace the scene that Lexi had with Rue, where she was like, I feel like you relapsed, and Rue was like, well, fuck you. And then she goes to go to Cassie's apartment, but Cassie has been abducted or whatever Cassie had going on. I would replace that conversation with this one because I think it hits a little harder when it's with Jules. I think it hurt Rue for sure coming from Lexi, but I think Jules, having been someone that Rue saw herself with romantically and genuinely loved and cared for, I think having this person say to Rue, like, fuck you, you are literally scum, you're inconsistent, you're the worst, and I hope I never see you again. Like, having that conversation, I think, would be really hard on Rue instead of the one that she had in canon with Lexi, where she's just like, well, fuck you, you loser, I'm sober. I would keep it though where this hard conversation is the last time that Jules and Rue ever speak to one another. I think there's something really, really tragic about that. I do like that they ended on a sour note. It speaks so much more to the tragedy of, like, you never know what can happen. Love your loved ones while you can, etc., etc., etc. In canon, we didn't really get many responses or reactions about Rue's death, and I'll address how I'd have had the characters respond in Rue's section toward the end, so just stay tuned for that. Before we jump into Maddy's section, I do just want to take a minute to say thank you guys so much for getting this far into the video. And if you're enjoying what you're seeing so far, consider giving this video a like and subscribing for more rewrites in the future. The very first line of dialogue we get from Maddy shows off her insecurities, which is interesting because she seems so confident within herself throughout the show. Even in season 1, where she grapples with so much, insecurity never really seems like it's at the top of her list of struggles. Yet there she is calling herself disgusting and complaining about how Nate's constant criticisms have completely ruined her confidence. The toxic relationship between Maddy and Nate in the first 2 seasons was genuinely some good writing. He loved her because of how beautiful and feminine she was. She loved him because he made her feel safe and he bought her everything she wanted. And they were opposite her parents, whose relationship she deeply resented because of how lackluster it was. Maddy and Nate's relationship got more and more toxic as the show went on. Their last scene together was a game of Russian roulette that Nate forced on her so that he could get the tapes of Cal and Jules back. At the end of season 2, my questions for Maddy were whether or not she'd be able to have a trusting and romantic relationship, whether her newfound maturity was real, or if she'd go back to her old ways when things got tough. And I wanted to know if she would truly be comfortable relying on a man to maintain her livelihood. Let's see how much of this Levinson cared enough to explore. In season 3, Maddy's character is all over the place. I don't really have much to say about her. At her core, she still feels like the same Maddy Perez that we've known all this time, but some of her decisions are so outlandish and out of character that it takes me out of the show. She's working as an assistant at an agency in LA, and she's managing models as a side hustle. And I think it's fairly easy to come to the conclusion that Nate's abuse traumatized Maddy enough where she felt like she no longer wanted to be a kept woman. She wanted to go ahead and get her own. We see this in, I think, episode 1 where she's on the phone with her mom and her mom is like, have you found a man yet? And she's like, Mom, I don't have time to date. I have too much going on. So it's pretty safe to say that her experience with Nate has caused her to decenter men and just enter her boss lady era. And you see how that one simple line of dialogue can really give so much insight into where her headspace is. I would have loved if we had a little bit more of that with Nate and Jules. At the start of the season, Maddy and Cassie reconcile, and Maddy is invited to their wedding, which she does attend. She even agrees to manage Cassie's OnlyFans against her boss's wishes, and this is pretty much what takes up majority of Maddie's screen time. She doesn't have an arc of her own, she's just Cassie's manager and a member of the old friend group. The most brain boggling decision that Maddy made this season was getting into business with Alamo after Rue specifically warned her that he was dangerous. Not only does she completely ignore Rue and go into business with this man anyway, but she outs Rue as a snitch to the DEA and gets her killed. On top of that, she becomes indebted to him after she tried to use him to rescue Nate, even though they were too late. It gets even spookier and spookier when Alamo decides that he wants to breed Maddy and force her into this American dream life with the white picket fence and make her raise his little mixed babies. Gross. So, was Maddy ever able to find this genuine romantic love that she craved so much in the first two seasons? No, not really. It's kind of hinted at that she might have something developing with Bishop, but we don't really get to see that unfold on screen, so I'm not gonna count it. Was her newfound maturity from the end of season 2 real? Yeah, I think it's safe to say that it was. There were plenty of instances in season 3 where the old Maddy would have absolutely gone bonkers, but she didn't. She maintained her cool, she kept it cute, she kept it classy, and she kept it pushing. I was genuinely impressed at how maturely she carried herself in season 3. My third question for Maddy was whether or not she'd really feel comfortable allowing a man to basically provide her livelihood for her. And I think the answer to this is very complicated. It's like it's yes and it's no at the same time. It's no because she is on her boss girl stuff. Like she does have this managing gig. She loses it messing around with Cassie, but she very much is in her hustler mentality. At the same time, though, Maddy and Cassie are fully engulfed in a male dominated kind of field. Their livelihood depends on pervs perving. But now that we've talked about Maddy's canon timeline, let's talk about what I would have done differently with her. Through Rue's narration in season 1, we learned that Maddy never ever wanted to have any kind of job. She wanted to be basically a trophy wife. She watched her mother serving women who she wanted to be like. So she would study these women, mimic their mannerisms, and learn how to attract the best suitors. That's how she was able to snatch up Nate so quick. As soon as he laid eyes on that girl, he was like, yeah, I want her. That's the one. So rather than having Maddy cut off men completely and go the corporate baddie route, I would actually do the opposite. Some people might think that this is character regression considering how her relationship with Nate failed, but I don't think that Maddy would allow that situation to completely alter what she wanted for herself. Yeah, Nate is a jerk, but that doesn't mean that every man is too. This is why I would tweak Jules's sugar baby storyline and give it to Maddy. But rather than having Maddy just be a traditional sugar baby, I would have her meet a producer through Lexi, and she would basically get him to propose to her, and at the start of season 3 they would be married, living in this huge house, kind of competing with Nate's house that he bought for him and Cassie. I would still have Maddy be super close with the girls, but her relationship with Lexi would be somewhat strained because y'all know how Lexi is. She's super judgmental and she would have everything to say under the sun about Maddy's lifestyle. So she would always be making comments like, yeah, you live off your husband, or you gotta ask permission to get some money, or things like that. And Maddy doesn't like that. Maddy, she still has that spark, that fire under her at the end of the day. Mature or not, or she's not gonna take Lexi being weird to her. So she is gonna have this like kind of altercation almost with Lexi. I kind of want this scene to resemble Jules and Rue's interaction. How Rue was kind of like, oh, you just stay here and you wait for him to come and screw you, yada yada. Like, I would want it to be similar to that, except Maddy wouldn't actually, slap Lexi, but she would tell her about herself and say, like, you don't get to tell me how to live my life. I'm doing what I think is best for myself. I love my life. And they would have a bit of a falling out. And since Maddy is married now and not needing to hustle for everything, we can completely scrap her involvement with Alamo. She's not a grunt work loser farting in jars anymore, so she has no reason to even be engaged with Alamo. She doesn't have any reason to see him as anything other than Rue's creepy boss. Another change I would make is I would have Maddy and Cassie be kidnapped by the Armenians together, and I would have them send the ransom to Maddy's husband. And when Maddy's husband shows up with the money, they're gonna take it and delete him anyway. And before Nate is killed, like when we have that moment where his life is flashing before his eyes and we get that reveal with his brother, I would have Tyler actually show up, and we learn that he is not only the son of the person who blocked Nate's real estate plan, but he's also the nephew of this Armenian mobster. And he's been the one orchestrating all of this from the beginning. Maddy wouldn't even recognize him at first, but once he refreshes her memory and reminds her of who he is, that's when Maddy would become hysterical. She'd be crying. She'd be like, I'm so sorry about what I did. I've changed. We've grown. We're different people now. So by the end of episode 7, both Maddy and Cassie would be widows. And as bad as that sounds, at least Maddy is not a victim to creepy ass Alamo now. Cassie felt like a real person in the first 2 seasons. She was deeply flawed and controversial, especially in season 2, but she felt like a human teenager navigating life and making mistakes. Season 3 Cassie is not a person. She is a fantasy wrapped up in the package of Sydney Sweeney's boobs. Cassie was a male-centered girl who was driven by her need to feel loved by men. We see that this internal conflict stems from her drug-dependent father abandoning her and their family. We also see her navigating relationships with boys like McKay and Daniel, and we watch her suffer heartbreak when they ultimately abandon her or feel ashamed of her or just use her like she's nothing more than her body. Even when they want more from her than her body, it's like it's the only thing she really even knows how to offer. We see this when McKay tries to vent about football, and the only way she can think of to comfort him is with sex. He calls her out and she gets upset, but in that scenario, he was right. Even she over-sexualizes herself. It's like she only feels worthy of love when she's using her body to experience it. Even with Nate in season 2, he doesn't actually like Cassie, and I think she knows that. That's why she's waking up at 4 in the morning to maintain this perfect image for him, and when that didn't work, she pivoted to channeling Maddy. She tied her entire identity and self-worth to whether or not he'd choose her, which was what made the pool scene so devastating when it turned out that Nate ultimately wanted to get back with Maddy. Cassie was willing to sacrifice all her fulfilling relationships with the women in her life, like Maddy and her own sister, over Nate, because the male validation was the only thing that made her feel whole inside. That's why I do think that her moving towards OnlyFans in season 3 does make sense. It gives her the opportunity to receive the attention she'd been craving in a much larger capacity, filling a void she wouldn't know how to fill otherwise. Granted, I would have approached the storyline in a more cohesive way, but we'll get there in a minute. By the end of season 2, I wanted to know whether or not Cassie would be able to decenter men in relation to her own self-worth and identity, if she would be able to repair the damage she had done to her female relationships due to her destructive behaviors, and finally, I wanted to know whether or not she'd be able to find something that she liked about herself other than her ability to turn men on. Season 3 Cassie is a very interesting character, but interesting, like, In a bad way, though. She starts off the season hounding Nate for $50,000 worth of flowers for their wedding. Which, you know what? This man had you uproot your entire life and forsake your truest friend. So if you need $50,000 worth of flowers to make that feel worth it for you, sister, go ahead. But when she loses me is when she looks Nathaniel Jacobs in the face and says to him that she will sell her body to get those flowers if that's what she has to do. What about season 1 and 2 Cassie makes you feel like she would do this? She wouldn't. Yes, she'd allowed boys to film their intimate sessions before, but she was devastated when those videos got leaked. It was the opposite reaction to Kat, for instance, who felt empowered by it, no matter how misguided that was. Cassie did not react the same way. She was devastated. She didn't want that stuff getting out to the public. She just wanted someone to love her and appreciate her and look at her and see her and choose her and want her. That is what she wanted, not the money and the flowers and all of this other material stuff. Where did that come from? Season 3 Cassie is all about using her body to gain fame and fortune, whilst before she used it to earn love. And you might argue, hey, Nathania, yeah, sure, OnlyFans is a way for her to multiply that love by millions, potentially. And to that, I just have to disagree. At the end of season 2, she told Nate that she would always follow his lead and essentially categorized herself as a submissive partner. So while I do understand Cassie becoming this person determined to make it on OnlyFans, after Nate's money debacles have been revealed, I'm struggling to see how she got there before it. And it might just be underdeveloped concepts that we didn't really get to explore because of the time jumps. Cassie did also try to use the lack of renovations on the house as an excuse for this, but I'm just not buying it. Even still, she's dressing up like a dog and wearing baby clothes because even bad attention is good attention. That is an angle I wish we could have explored more. But I do think that we would have benefited from getting a little bit more information about what happened between the time jump. Again, if we had done that special episode with Nate and Rue between seasons 2 and 3, in Nate's special episode, we could have, even if Cassie wasn't involved, we still could have gotten some dialogue trying to fill in those gaps. But the wedding happens and the newlyweds are attacked in their home, causing Cassie to leave Nate and go to LA to pursue a career in porn. Maddy agrees to manage her and introduces her to all of the right people, which allows Cassie to grow her following, where she can send Nate $30,000 to $40,000 increments every so often, so that she can help pay off his debt. The part in episode 4 where Maddy comes into Cassie's apartment and you see the vibrator is turned on and she's surrounded by a bunch of dildos and she's just passed out is hilarious to me. I feel like it's grossly inaccurate, but it's still so funny. Anyway, she almost gets to pivot into acting, but that was just a waste of screen time that we could have spent on Jules or even Kat had she been respected enough to be included. Cassie receives some pieces of Nate before being tied up in the most unnecessary and uncomfortable way possible. She solicits Maddy to help her free Nate, but it's too late. He's been taken out by a rattlesnake, and now Maddy has sold her soul for nothing. So, was Cassie ever really able to decenter men in relation to her own self-worth? No. I'd say no. Did she repair the female relationships in her life in response to her destructive behaviors? I think it's safe to say, yeah, she did. It seemed like her relationship with both Maddy and her sister were in solid places by the end of the season. And was Cassie able to find something that she enjoyed about herself other than her ability to turn on men? No. She was not. So, that's pretty sad. Let's see what I would have done differently. I mentioned before that Cassie's sudden interest in OnlyFans felt very forced, but I think that it could have been handled a lot more organically for her character. Somewhere along the lines, Cassie's motivations swapped from wanting to just be loved and chosen to wanting to be paid for and lusted after. And I feel like we missed the opportunity to show how she got from point A to point B. A great opportunity to do this comes from that conversation where Cassie is sitting at the table with Nate complaining about the flowers, and he is scrolling on his phone looking at Jules' Instagram. We talked about that earlier in his section. So from Cassie's point of view, she's talking to Nate about how excited she is to marry him and be his wife and just love on him forever and dote on him, and he is not listening to her at all. And we would see the passion just draining from her face as the scene goes on. Cassie would bring up the wedding flowers, and again, he would be uninterested and unengaged in the conversation. And this would be the first time that Cassie mentions wanting to start an OnlyFans and her using it as a means to get the flowers for her wedding. But this would really just be a tactic used by Cassie to get his attention. It's not necessarily something that she wants to do and is genuinely passionate about. She just feels like this is the only way that he would even acknowledge her, which he does acknowledge her. Once she says this, he looks up at her and he immediately dismisses the idea of her being on OnlyFans. And this is when she would again rebuttal him and say, well, we haven't done any renovations, we haven't done this, I want money, I want flowers, I want this, I want that, you would do this for Maddy, why wouldn't you do it for me? But he would continue to just shut Cassie down completely and say, this conversation is shelved, you're not doing OnlyFans, I can afford to provide for us, I just need a little bit of time because I'm investing in this retirement community right now. And Cassie wouldn't bring it up again until after Nate is beat up by the Armenians. But in episode 4, when Cassie leaves Nate to pursue OnlyFans in LA, he would be firmly against it. But she'd insist that this is the only way she can provide for them because he clearly isn't doing what he needs to do. She would ultimately sway him by letting him know that even though she is using her body to make this money, none of these men would ever be able to touch her the way Nate can touch her. They would never have the same access. She's basically just using them to get their money. And it'll benefit Nate in the end. So this is what she's able to say to kind of convince him to let her leave, but he would not feel good about it, and he would still be doing anything he can to prevent Cassie from going as far as she could go. Cassie going down this route because she wants to save her husband and save her marriage makes a lot more sense for this character rather than her just having a big head about people's husbands checking her out at the pool and that making her feel like she deserves to be famous. And there's something about this that makes it even so much more tragic. The fact that she's willing to go to these lengths to protect Nate and make sure that he stays alive for him to ultimately still be killed in the end after she went through all of this, and now she still doesn't get his love. In canon, Maddy and Cassie repaired their relationship through the business, but because Maddy is a Pilates hottie and not doing grunt work, farting in jars, I'm gonna have to make them repair their relationship in a different way. We'll say that Cassie asked for Maddy's help getting into film after Lexi rejected her. And at first, Maddy would refuse this, saying that she wouldn't allow Cassie near her producer husband with a 10-foot pole. But when Cassie moves to LA to pursue OnlyFans, Maddy would feel bad for the girl and decide to throw her a bone. And she would not do this through her husband. She would instead do the same thing she did in canon by, I think she threatened Lexi to get Cassie an audition. So I would have her do that. And as I mentioned earlier, I would not drop the storyline with Cassie in the whole acting career. I would still have Lexi write the whole storyline for her, ultimately killing off her character, but I would follow it up by Cassie getting auditions for another role, an even bigger role, which would annoy the living bejesus out of Lexi because Cassie is like failing up at that point. And she would be very eager to share this news with Nate, but by this point, he would already be kidnapped. And as I mentioned before, I would have the Armenians kidnap both Cassie and Maddy together rather than just having Cassie tied up in the bed at her apartment. So the hoods will be removed from the two girls' heads and they would be facing Nate while they're tied to chairs. And they're seeing Nate, but he is basically unrecognizable because they've been beating the living hell out of him. Like his face is bashed in. He looks awful, to the point where Cassie screams at the sight of him. Nas would threaten Cassie, saying that he should sell her to make up for Nate's debt. Tyler, who's been revealed as not only the son of the real estate guy who blocked Nate's project from being pushed through, but he's also the nephew of this Armenian boss. I think Nas is his name. He's his nephew, and he's been behind this whole thing, pushing the strings and orchestrating everything along the way. Tyler would jump in and say he want to keep Maddy all for himself so he can show her how it felt to go through everything he went through. Hyped up by the threats put on Maddy and Cassie, Nate would get enough of an energy boost to start spewing out homophobic slurs to Nas, Tyler, and the bodyguard, and Nas would not take this very lightly. In response, the bodyguard would pistol whip Nate, and Nas would load up the gun with one bullet before engaging in a game of Russian roulette between Nate and Cassie. This is the moment where we see Nate's life flashing before his eyes, and right when we get the reveal of what Nate did to his little brother, Cal knowing all about it and protecting him, that is when the last bullet would be released into Nate's skull, and blood would splatter all over Cassie and Maddy. I like this ending for Nate because it feels so full circle considering all of the things that he's done in the past. And it's not just random karma either. These are direct consequences of his actions. I would love to know how you guys feel about this ending for Nate. So guys, please leave a comment down below and let me know how you're feeling about it. I love chatting with you guys in the comments. Also, thank you guys for 900 subscribers. What? We're so close to 1,000 subscribers. I'm so excited, and thank you guys so much for watching these videos all the way to the end. This is a long video that we're in today. So if you've made it this far, shout out to you. Thanks, friend. We're internet besties, might as well be. Go ahead and subscribe if you're not already. Last but not least, let's talk about Miss Rue Bennett. We're introduced to Rue through her own narration, where we see that she struggled through life pretty much from childhood. Psychologists deem her obsessive, compulsive, anxious, and maybe even bipolar before she was even 12. She was heavily medicated to help ease these symptoms, which caused her to sleepwalk through her preteens between anxiety attacks and a never-ending exhaustion. In high school, she started experimenting with drugs and spent the summer before her junior year of high school in rehab because her younger sister found her after an overdose. Upon returning, she met Jules, whom she also became kind of addicted to in a way, as a means to stay sober from drugs. Rue and Jules' relationship is passionate and beautiful, but it's also toxic and overbearing. Rue becomes dependent on her, and Jules feels the weight of Rue's sobriety to be way too heavy. It's triggering considering her own mother's battles with addiction and their complicated relationship. Ultimately, Ju does out Rue as relapse to her mother, and the girls have a brutal fallout at the end of season 2. The first 2 seasons are essentially Rue losing a battle to addiction. She'll relapse, crash out, sulk in regret, and then repeat the cycle over and over again. So under the watchful eye of her mother and a lack of funds, Rue decides to hatch a plan so that she could do drugs for free. She tries to pitch Fez at first, who rightfully shuts it down immediately. He don't even want to hear the plan. But instead of taking that L and walking away with her head held up high, Rue decides to go to Fez's supplier, and she convinces that woman to front her a suitcase of $10,000 worth of drugs. And this is the decision that ultimately trickles down and costs Rue her life. Now, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I actually liked Rue's arc in season 3. I know, I get it. A lot of people hated it. But while I do miss the glitter, I don't even mind the whole Western theme. It's okay for shows to reinvent themselves now and then. I think it's fine. What I did miss, though, was Lambeth's score. The music felt like such a core part of this show's identity, and without it, there was just part of its soul that felt like it was missing. And I really do wish that Levinson and Lambeth were able to work together for the good of the art, but Alas, they were not. Anyway, Rue is forced to be a drug mule to pay off her debt to Lori, but switches over to Alamo's side when she catches sight of the strip club. I do kind of want to say that it felt a little jarring to see Rue being so overtly sexual this season when in the past she was damn near asexual. Was a part in season 2, I believe, where Jules did say that she thinks Rue was kind of numb to anything sexual because of all the drugs that she took. And considering that Rue was mostly sober this season, I guess it makes sense as to how that happened, but it was still a little strange to see. But I do like the journey that Rue goes on this season. I don't mind her falling for the Christians or going down this route where she's looking for a deeper meaning to life. Some of my favorite scenes this season are when she was sitting in the church and she got that call from her mother, and then when she's driving and she finds the tree on fire. Those visuals were outstanding. And Zendaya is such an amazing actress. Her performance was just out of this world. You can really see everything that Rue is feeling just from Zendaya's portrayal of this character. I can imagine anyone else playing this person. And it's so tragic because despite all her flaws and mistakes, Rue is genuinely trying to do better for herself this season, but her past just keeps coming to bite her in the ass. She gets approached by the DEA and decides to become a snitch so that she can become free from the drug life and start over on this Christian farm. She reads the Bible and tries to find something bigger than herself to live for. She fantasizes about having a family and starting a life, maybe with Jules, maybe with someone else. But the most tragic part about her journey this season is that despite her working towards becoming a better person and staying sober, everyone around her is still so jaded by her past that she cannot escape it. Her own mother refused to answer her calls. That was until Bishop paid her a visit and convinced her that Rue was doing better. This was just a tactic, though, to make sure that Rue didn't stray or betray them. He wanted Rue to know that they could get a hold of her mom. It was like a threat. Jules felt so burned by Rue that she pimp slapped the girl for speaking up about her poor decisions. Maddy was working with Alamo for some reason, and Lexi accused her of still being on drugs. The only person who was still in her corner after everything was Ali, a man who understood Rue to her core. He'd been where she'd been, which was rock bottom. Ultimately, Rue's cooperation with the DEA is exposed to Alamo, and he kills her with fentanyl, the same drug she described as providing the best feeling in the world back in season 1. Ali ends up quitting Narcotics Anonymous and avenging Rue with a traditional Western shootout at the strip club. Now, we didn't get any kind of funeral or anything really of the rest of her friends mourning Rue, and I think that's really a shame. But let's get into how I would have done things differently for Rue's arc in season 3. Now, I mentioned already how much I loathe these religious monologues that Levinson gave these characters who otherwise have never been religious. I talked about how I would have had Rue and Fez be the ones to kind of have Lexi second guessing her beliefs, and how forced her last conversation with Cassie was. A character that Levinson could have used more organically for these conversations could easily have been Ali. In Rue's special episode, she talked to him a lot about religion. She actually did have a couple conversations with Ali in season 3 about religion, about redemption. But still, his presence was a lot more heavy at the end of the season, and I do wish he had been a consistent figure all throughout the season. Kind of like her moral compass on one shoulder, whereas Alamo was the devil on her other shoulder. Instead of focusing too much on Rue's arc this season, because like I said, I did really enjoy a lot of it, I want to talk about everyone's responses to her passing instead. They're showing Ali dial her mama's number and walk off screen was diabolical, especially when you consider that Lexi was in this episode, and I wanted to experience the despair in her eyes and witness the tears and the breakdown from this mother who we spent the last 2 seasons desperately trying to save her daughter. It would have been nice if we had gotten to see Gia in the background too, overhearing this and just crying in silence as she often did. And we barely even got any reaction from any of her friends. Like I said before, I would have had Lexi be the one to break the news to Fez about Rue's passing. And obviously, we wouldn't be able to hear Fez's side of the story, but we would hear Lexi answering him, and she would share her perspective on religion along the same lens of the conversation she had with Cassie when she was cleaning off her, dildos. But this is the point where I would let Levinson kind of hammer in his points about Jesus being the answer, or whatever message it was he was trying to convey with this crap show of a season. So towards the end of the final episode, I would have Jules, Maddy, Cassie, Kat, and Lexi all gather at the complex that Lexi and Cassie lives in to say a final goodbye to Rue. I don't think we necessarily needed a full funeral scene, but some kind of acknowledgement from all of her friends, at least showing some signs of distress. That would have been nice. A little montage of sorts with some behind the scenes footage from the first 2 seasons could have been really cool. Any kind of reaction from them, really, that would have been bigger than the little farm girl who met Rue once. Yeah, anything bigger than that would have been genuinely much better. Speaking of the farm girl, though, I think the idea of Rue being reincarnated as a cow is absolutely hilarious. I had to pause the show because I was laughing so hard at this reveal. And it's even funnier because I don't hate this. I think reincarnating Rue as an animal on the homestead makes sense because the girl clearly could not handle being a human. She'd have a much larger purpose in providing nourishment with her milk, and she'd be close to the Christian girl who you cannot convince me Rue didn't give a gay awakening to. However, I would not have made the final shot of this show closing out with God Bless America. That flat out felt like a troll. I was gagged, like in a bad way. Instead, I'd have rounded the show back to the beginning of the pilot episode where Rue's voiceover discusses her own birth being a cruel act that destroyed her happiness. In this case, she'd be referring to her death and to feeling at peace, which would be when I would reveal the farm life reincarnation. And yes, it's genuinely so funny that I've decided I would keep it. All in all, I had so much fun breaking down this series with you guys and rewriting the character arcs. I would love to know which of these rewrites you enjoyed the best. Were there aspects of the canon timeline that you preferred? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, you would love the one up on the screen, so go ahead and check that out.